Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into a century that blazes with rivalry, intrigue, and a stubbornness that could melt steel. If you even survive the chaos that's coming, that is. Imagine yourself standing in the early 14th century, in a small village on the edge of the English Channel. The damp, cold air wraps around you like a rough wool cloak. The scent of wood smoke curling lazily from stone chimneys. The sky is a dull gray, promising rain that never quite falls. Around you, farmers are settling in for the night, tending their tired oxen, while nobles behind distant walls whisper in candlelit chambers. What you probably don't realize yet is that this sleepy landscape is the tinderbox for a war that will stretch for over a century. Fire blazing between two fierce kingdoms, England and France. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Are you watching as the sun sets in London? Or is it the middle of the night in Paris? Maybe you're somewhere totally unexpected, and if so, I'm jealous. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. This isn't just a story about battles and kings with fancy hats, though there will be plenty of those. It's about the tangled roots of a rivalry that feels as much like family drama as geopolitical conflict. You see, the roots of this 100-year storm go back centuries to a place called Normandy, a rugged stretch of French coastline that once belonged to Vikings. Picture fierce, blonde warriors in longbows, axes in hand, eyes sharp and wild as the sea spray. Around the year 911, a Viking chieftain named Rollo negotiated with the French king Charles the Simple. The deal was simple but significant. Rollo would stop raiding if he was given land and the title of Duke of Normandy. It's like handing the wildest kid in class a leadership badge and hoping he'll behave. That deal birthed a dynasty that would haunt history. The Normans quickly adopted the French language and customs, melding Viking ferocity with Frankish refinement. Fast forward to 1066, when William the Bastard, later known as William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, decides to cross the Channel with his fleet and take the English crown by force. That battle at Hastings, with arrows darkening the sky, shattered the Anglo-Saxon order and tied England irrevocably to the continent. Now, you can feel how the political landscape starts to twist. The English king holds lands in France, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Aquitaine, all vast, wealthy, and fiercely contested. This patchwork of territories makes English kings powerful French nobles too. Imagine wearing two very different hats, each demanding loyalty to different masters. And sometimes, those masters are glaring at each other across battlefields. Here's a quirky detail. The English king's lands in France, especially Aquitaine in the southwest, produce some of the finest wine in Europe. And controlling these vineyards isn't just a matter of pride. It's a serious economic stake. And in medieval times, wine was the closest thing to currency for the nobles, or at least a daily necessity. So the stakes were not only about crown and country, but about barrels of Bordeaux too. You might think this is dry history, but it's actually A story that could fill any medieval vineyard owner's wildest gossip hour. Over the decades, tensions simmer as the English kings try to hold on to these French possessions, while the French crown aims to consolidate its power. Kings, dukes, and counts squabble over feudal loyalties and the rights to tax and govern. The French kings view the English territories as rebellious vassals at best and outright enemies at worst. The English, meanwhile, feel like rightful rulers and often act like distant overlords, ruling through local lords who might be more loyal to Paris than to London. Enter the Plantagenets, the royal house that rules England starting with Henry VI in the 12th century. They inherit vast French lands through marriage and inheritance, creating a tangled web of claims that feels more like a spider's web ready to snap than a stable foundation for peace. Plantagenet kings often spend more time on the continent than in England, trying to maintain their French estates and manage complex alliances. Now, the immediate cause of the 100 Years' War lies in a legal and dynastic dispute following the death of the French King Charles IV in 1328. Charles dies without a male heir, leaving the French throne open. Here's where medieval inheritance laws get tricky. French nobles invoke the Salic law, which forbids succession through the female line. So, Edward III of England, whose mother Isabella was Charles IV's sister, has a claim through her. But the French nobility reject this and crown Philip VI, a cousin from the male line. You can almost see Edward III, a young and ambitious king, pacing the halls of his castle, gripping a goblet of wine, debating his next move. Is this a legal slight or the perfect excuse to expand his power? The answer, as historians still argue today, is somewhere in between. Some say Edward genuinely believed in his rightful claim, while others think he seized the opportunity to launch a campaign for land and prestige. But why does this dispute matter so much? Because it's not just about who wears the crown. It's about power, identity, and survival. The French crown represents not only a kingdom, but the authority over a patchwork of regions with different languages, laws, and loyalties. England, smaller but wealthy and growing, wants to protect its possessions and assert itself as a major European power. The stage is set for a conflict that will rage for more than a century. Beyond kings and nobles, the war's causes reach into everyday life. English wool merchants depend heavily on trade with Flanders, a rich textile-producing region under French influence. So a war risks choking the flow of wool and money, threatening not only noble incomes, but the livelihoods of merchants, weavers, and workers. Economic interests often fuel the fires as much as political ones. You might wonder about the armies. Unlike the standing professional armies of today, medieval armies were often feudal levies. Nobles called their vassals, peasants gathered their tools, and knights donned heavy armor. The logistics of raising and feeding such forces were a constant headache. You're standing in a village, watching your neighbor saddle a horse and swear loyalty to a distant lord, knowing he might never come back. Quirky detail: the English longbow, a powerful weapon that would later define many battles, was already becoming a formidable part of English military strategy. Peasants trained from childhood in its use, and archery contests were common. The longbow required strength and skill, a far cry from the typical medieval idea of war, being just about heavily armored knights, charging swords drawn. There's also the diplomatic dance. Marriages, alliances, betrayals. It's like a royal soap opera, but with swords and castles. One moment, the English king might be marrying a French princess. The next, that princess's family is plotting war. Nobles switched sides like fashion trends, and loyalties were as fluid as the tides on the Channel coast. Historians still argue whether the war was inevitable or the result of missed diplomatic chances and misunderstandings. Could the two kingdoms have found peaceful ways to sort their differences? Or was the clash written in the stars? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, a complex mix of ambition, pride, economic interests, and old grudges. As you step back from this world, imagine the slow build-up. Knights polishing armor, peasants whispering rumors, kings sending messengers on cold nights. The war hasn't started yet, but the flames are licking the edges of the forest. What begins as a dynastic quarrel will soon sweep across battlefields, villages, and castles, changing the face of Europe forever. In the quiet of that pre-war evening, you might think, how bad can it get? Well, brace yourself. The 100 years ahead will be soaked in blood, mud, and fire, but also moments of strange heroism, unexpected alliances, and cultural shifts. This is no dry history lesson. It's a vivid saga told just for you, to ease into the night with the sound of distant trumpets and the crackle of torches. Remember that vineyard we mentioned? Those wine barrels will survive, but many knights and peasants will not. The stage is set, the players are ready, and the 100 years of fire are about to begin. You step forward, past the flickering torchlight, and out of the sleepy village shadows, into the growing thunder of conflict. The fire you glimpsed in Section 1 hasn't just caught, it's roaring. And now the dice of fate are rolling across a chessboard that stretches from the green pastures of England to the vineyards and forests of France. The early years of this war might seem like a scattered collection of feuds, sieges, and battles. But you'll soon see the patterns of power, innovation, and sheer stubbornness that turn mere quarrels into epoch-shaping clashes. Before we get knee-deep in muddy battlefields, remember to hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying this journey. And don't forget to tell me where you are and what time it is there. That way, we can feel connected even as we leap centuries and miles into the past. Now take a deep breath, maybe stretch your fingers, and let's continue sliding into the thick of these early Anglo-French skirmishes. The early 14th century is a volatile time, with monarchs juggling fragile alliances and the pressing demands of their subjects. The war that's about to unfurl isn't just a matter of armies charging headlong. It's also about laws, claims, and the sharp edge of politics. But most visibly, it's about the deadly introduction of weapons and tactics that change the very face of war. First, let's talk about one of the most notorious early battlefield weapons, the crossbow. If you imagine a crossbow as a medieval sniper rifle, you're not far off. This mechanical marvel lets a soldier fire heavy bolts with terrifying accuracy and force, piercing armor that traditional bows might not breach. The crossbow was a game changer, but it was also controversial. Knights considered it dishonorable, a coward's weapon, because it required less skill and courage than wielding a sword or longbow. But practical commanders loved it, since it allowed infantry to shoot with devastating effect. Picture a battlefield lined with crossbowmen, bolts flying through the mist and rain, finding gaps in armor and horsehide. The French heavily relied on these weapons early in the war, and English forces had to adapt quickly. The longbowmen you met briefly last section weren't just peasants with pointy sticks. They were the answer to this new threat, capable of unleashing volleys of arrows that could outrun and outshoot their crossbow rivals. Speaking of which, the English crown began enforcing strict laws to keep archery skills sharp among the common folk. Archery practice became mandatory, often under penalty of fines or public punishment. You can almost hear the groans from peasant lads dragged from the fields to fire arrows at wooden targets. Also, the king's armies could unleash rainstorms of death on the enemy. But the early clashes weren't just about weapons. They were about territory and control. The French crown, now under Philip VI, started confiscating English-held lands in France as punishment for Edward III's claims. The seizure of the Duchy of Aquitaine was particularly provocative. It was a rich region with fertile lands and important ports. Imagine a prosperous city waking up one day to find its rulers replaced by foreign overlords. Taxes doubled and allegiances questioned. The English responded by assembling forces to reclaim these territories, and skirmishes turned into full-scale battles. Nobles mustered their knights, peasants shouldered pikes, and mercenaries gathered for pay. The smell of sweat, smoke, and blood soon became a grim backdrop. One early clash that sets the tone is the Battle of Sluys in 1340, fought at sea. Picture hundreds of ships, their sails black against a stormy sky, clashing in the narrow waters off the Flemish coast. The English fleet, under Edward III himself, decisively defeated the French, gaining control of the Channel. This naval victory was crucial. It allowed England to ferry troops and supplies across the water relatively unchallenged. Here's a quirky side note. Medieval naval battles were less about cannon and more about brute force. Ships would ram into each other, and sailors would leap aboard enemy vessels for hand-to-hand combat. Imagine that. Sea battles turning into floating brawls with swords, axes, and maybe some very panicked seagulls. The victory at Sluys gave the English the freedom to bring their armies into France, setting the stage for larger land battles. But controlling the sea was never guaranteed. Storms, supply problems, and French privateers kept things uncertain. Now think about the soldiers marching behind these fleets. The army was a motley crew, knights in shining armor, archers carrying longbows, foot soldiers with spears or axes, and even specialists like engineers and sappers. War camps were bustling small towns of tents, smoke from cooking fires, and the constant noise of training, quarrels, and the occasional stray pig rooting through supplies. On campaign, life was brutal. Muddy roads turned to quagmires in rain. Disease spread faster than arrows. you'd likely find yourself sharing rations of hard biscuits and watered wine, sleeping on cold ground, and dodging the arrows of unseen enemies. In 1346, the campaign culminated in the famous Battle of Crécy. Picture dawn breaking over a foggy English encampment. King Edward III, seasoned and determined, surveys a field near the town of Crécy-en-Ponthieu. The French army, larger and confident, advances across the plain, heavily armored knights and cavalry leading the charge. But the English longbowmen unleash a relentless hail of arrows, breaking up the French attacks before they can reach the lines. Horses fall, knights are unhorsed, and confusion ripples through the ranks. The battlefield becomes a muddy, chaotic mess as the French cavalry struggles against the rain and the deadly volleys. This battle isn't just a victory, it's a revolution in medieval warfare. The longbow proves its deadly efficiency, showing that disciplined infantry can hold off traditional mounted knights. The idea of chivalry and knightly combat faces a serious challenge here. But remember, the story isn't all strategy and weapons. The human cost is staggering. Thousands dead or wounded, families shattered, and villages burned. The war reshapes lives far beyond the battlefield. An unexpected and grim twist arrives in the mid-1340s, the Black Death. This bubonic plague sweeps across Europe, killing an estimated third of the population. Armies dwindle as soldiers die, not just from battle wounds, but from disease and starvation. Entire towns vanish or shrink. The plague pauses the fighting in many areas, creating a grim interlude. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers believed the plague was a divine punishment and carried charms or special herbs to protect themselves. Others simply fled, spreading the disease faster. Imagine trying to maintain discipline and morale in camps where death lurks unseen in every breath. Historians still argue how much the Black Death directly influenced the war's course. Did it weaken one side more than the other? Did it shift social structures, making peasants more valuable and changing the nature of feudal armies? The answers remain part of the ongoing debate. Despite these setbacks, the war grinds on. English kings push further into France, seizing castles and towns, while the French crown tries to rally nobles and mercenaries to resist. The countryside becomes a patchwork of loyalty, with some towns siding with the English for protection or profit, others staunchly French. As you picture these early years, you realize the war is more than a series of battles. It's a complex dance of power, technology, culture, and sheer human endurance. The flames that started with disputed claims now scorch the lands, leaving scars that will shape European history. So, as the sun sets again on these early days, you prepare yourself for the epic clashes still to come. Battles that will echo through time, heroes and villains, victories and losses, all part of this 100 years of fire. You're moving steadily now, boots crunching on the rough stones of a narrow road flanked by muddy fields and dense woods, carrying the weight of history as the war marches forward into one of its most thunderous moments, the Battle of Crécy. No flashy intro here, just you stepping into the swirling smoke and shattered shields of a day that will echo through time and redefine medieval warfare. Remember to like and subscribe If this vivid trek through the past is lighting up your evening, and don't forget to shout out your location and time. Maybe you're listening just as the English dawn breaks, or while the French candles flicker late at night. That connection helps us share this story, as if we're all gathered around the same crackling campfire. So, it's August 26th, 1346, and you find yourself in the rolling countryside near Crécy-en-Ponthieu in northern France. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and smoke from campfires. Dawn's pale light flickers across tents and armor, catching on polished helmets and the taut strings of longbows. Armies on both sides prepare for what will become a defining clash. The English army, led by King Edward III, is smaller but battle-hardened, marching north after a long campaign through France. You can almost hear the soft murmur of prayers and the occasional clinking of chainmail. The men are weary, but their discipline and determination crackle like a live wire among the ranks. Opposite them, the French army, vast, confident, and heavily armored, gathers under King Philip VI's banner. The French knights, clad in gleaming plate and heavy surcoats, flex their muscles and prepare to charge. It's the classic medieval scene. Noble horsemen ready to sweep the field in a thunderous cavalry charge, supported by crossbowmen and infantry. But here's where the story shifts dramatically. The English longbowmen, often underestimated by traditional knightly elites, take their positions with grim focus. These men, many of them peasants trained from youth in the longbow's deadly craft, know their weapons can pierce armor and bring down horses at remarkable distances. You can feel the tension. A taut wire stretched across the muddy battlefield as the French knights advance. The sky is heavy, and intermittent drizzle turns the earth into a quagmire, making the horses' footing treacherous. As the charge begins, the longbowmen unleash a storm of arrows. The sky darkens as thousands of shafts arc through the air, thudding into men and horses alike. The French knights plunge forward, but are slowed and disorganized by the muddy ground and the relentless barrage. Horses fall, men stumble, and confusion ripples through the ranks. The battle becomes a chaotic melee, with knights struggling to regroup as the English forces hold firm behind defensive stakes planted in the ground. It's a brutal scene. Steel clashes, cries echo, and the ground quickly turns red and churned. A quirky detail to picture. Legend has it that Edward's son, the Black Prince, fought bravely at Crécy, but some accounts also humorously claim he wore oversized armor, making him look more like a walking tower than a sleek knight. Medieval armor fashion had its moments. Crécy isn't just a battle, it's a turning point. The dominance of heavily armored cavalry is challenged, and the importance of well-trained infantry and ranged weapons is established. This shift begins to erode the centuries-old chivalric ideal that knights on horseback were invincible, but the aftermath is sobering. Thousands are dead or wounded, and among the fallen are many French nobles, including King Philip's own son. The loss devastates French morale and leaves the crown vulnerable. Historians still argue whether Crécy was a result of superior English strategy, French overconfidence, or simply bad luck combined with the weather. Some suggest The muddy terrain doomed the French charge from the start, while others point to the English army's innovative tactics. Meanwhile, the war's larger picture unfolds. The English continue their campaign, laying siege to towns and castles, trying to consolidate gains. The French retreat and regroup, attempting to rally support from their nobles and allies. The war isn't only fought with swords and arrows. It's fought in the shadows of diplomacy and intrigue. Alliances shift like the tides, with smaller states and noble families choosing sides based on promises, marriages, or threats. Imagine the life of a common soldier or peasant in this world, caught between armies, facing the terror of raids and conscriptions, watching their homes become battlegrounds. The war reshapes not only kings and knights, but also the everyday lives of millions. And remember, the longbowmen. Their victory at Crécy sets the stage for their continued importance throughout the conflict. The English crown invests in maintaining this deadly weapon's dominance. As night falls on the aftermath, the battlefield is silent except for the moans of the wounded and the crackle of campfires. The cost of victory weighs heavily on both sides, but England's resolve only hardens. The 100 Years' War will rage on for decades, with more battles, sieges, and heroes emerging from the smoke. But Crécy remains one of the war's defining moments, a thunderclap that changes the rules of medieval warfare forever. So, settle in, breathe deep, and prepare for the next chapter. The shocking capture of the French king himself. That one's coming up next. And it's a story that turns the war upside down. You press onward, stepping from the muddy fields of Crécy into the swirling chaos and sudden shock of the Battle of Poitiers. No fresh introductions here, just you, caught in the unfolding storm as the war's firestorms spread across the landscape. As always, before we continue, if you haven't yet, take a moment to like and subscribe, and let me know your location and local time. It's the little threads that keep this ancient story alive and connected. It's September 19th, 1356, and you're standing on the plains near Poitiers, a city of winding streets and stone walls nestled in central France. The sun has fought its way through heavy clouds, casting a grayish light over two massive armies, facing off once again. On one side stands the English force, under the command of Edward, the Black Prince, son of Edward III, a figure growing into his own legend. On the other, the French army, led by King John II himself, determined to crush the English invaders. The air is tense, heavy with the metallic scent of armor and sweat. Thousands of men, knights, archers, pikemen, and foot soldiers await the signal, their weapons gleaming and nerves stretched tight. You can almost feel the electric pulse of anticipation and dread mixed with grim determination. The battle unfolds much like the English hoped, utilizing the longbow and the terrain to their advantage. The Black Prince's forces dig in on a ridge, forcing the French to attack uphill through muddy fields under a hailstorm of arrows. The French knights charge repeatedly, But the English defenses hold firm, the arrows tearing through men and horses alike. In a sudden and brutal twist, the French king John VI is captured in the fray. Imagine the chaos as the monarch is unhorsed and dragged from the battlefield. A crown suddenly lost amidst the shouts and clashing steel. This stunning event shocks Europe. A reigning king taken prisoner by his enemy. This capture doesn't just tip the scales militarily. It shakes the very foundations of French power and prestige. The king's imprisonment in England leads to ransom negotiations that will drain France's treasury and strain its nobility. Towns and lords question their loyalty. France seems vulnerable in a way it hasn't before. On the English side, this victory and the king's capture bolster morale immensely. The Black Prince gains renown as a brilliant military commander, and England's position on the continent strengthens. Here's a quirky detail that often gets overlooked. After the battle, the Black Prince reportedly treated his prisoners, including King John VI, with a mix of chivalry and pragmatism, providing accommodations befitting a monarch, but firmly holding him until ransom terms were met. The medieval concept of honor among enemies still had a hold, even amid brutal conflict. But the broader consequences ripple through Europe. The capture sparks diplomatic upheavals, shifting alliances, and new negotiations that blur the lines between war and peace. The war drags on, but with a new dynamic. France must cope without its king, and England must balance military gains with the costs of holding prisoners and occupied territories. Historians still argue about the strategic impact of Poitiers. Some see it as the high point of English fortune, while others view it as the start of overstretch and eventual French resurgence. What's clear is that the capture of a king was a medieval rarity and a symbol of the brutal, unpredictable nature of this 100-year storm. You might wonder what this meant for ordinary people. The ransom for King John VI was so huge that French nobles levied heavy taxes to pay it, sparking unrest and hardship. Imagine peasants grinding harder under these burdens, while nobles debated loyalty and strategy far from the fields. As you step back from the battlefield's smoke and noise, you realize the war is no longer just a clash of armies. It's a test of kingdoms' endurance, economies, and wills. The 100 years of fire burn fiercely, but the flame flickers and shifts, never quite dying out. Get ready for the next stage. A plague so deadly it sweeps armies aside and turns battlefields into ghost towns. That's coming up, and it's as chilling as any sword. You step back from the clamor of swords and the shock of captured kings, only to find yourself in the chilling silence that descends across Europe in the mid-14th century, a silence filled with dread and death. The Black Death is here, and it's not just soldiers who fall. Entire populations crumble, empires tremble, and the war itself falters under its shadow. Before we settle into this bleak chapter, please hit like and subscribe if this saga grips you, and share your location and local time. It's amazing to think that, as we talk about plague and peril, somewhere in the world, a fan hums softly or a candle flickers in the dark. Now, breathe deep and let the eerie quiet of this moment sink in. From 1347 to 1351, the bubonic plague, known today as the Black Death, sweeps across Europe with a speed and lethality unmatched before or since. It arrives on merchant ships docking at ports, carried by fleas on rats that scurry unseen through the hulls. Within months, cities and villages alike fall silent, their streets littered with the sick and dying. You can almost feel the cold grip of terror as families barricade themselves inside, and priests walk empty churches, muttering prayers that seem to go unanswered. The plague doesn't discriminate. Nobles and peasants, soldiers and civilians, all fall victim. Up to a third of Europe's population perishes, leaving fields untilled and armies decimated. This sudden demographic catastrophe halts the momentum of the 100 Years' War. Armies shrink as soldiers succumb to disease. Supply lines falter. Kings and commanders hesitate to launch campaigns into the wastelands that plague has left behind. Quirky detail: medieval medicine was, unsurprisingly, largely useless against the plague. Physicians carried herbs and amulets, bleeding patients, or prescribing strange remedies like crushed emeralds or dried toads. Some believed the plague was caused by bad air or divine wrath, leading to bizarre rituals and scapegoating. The social fabric strains under the weight of death and fear. Labor shortages give surviving peasants more bargaining power, slowly undermining the rigid feudal system. Peasants demand better wages or leave estates for better opportunities, sparking unrest. Landowners grapple with dwindling incomes and disrupted harvests. Historians still argue the Black Death's long-term impact on the war and medieval society. Did it weaken the nobility's grip, fueling the decline of feudalism? Did it shift the balance of power toward commoners and towns? Some suggest it even influenced military tactics by reducing available manpower. Amid this bleak landscape, both England and France struggle to maintain their claims and control. The French crown, weakened but unbroken, begins to rebuild. England, despite its naval supremacy, faces growing challenges to supply and manpower. Life during the plague was a terrifying gamble. You imagine walking through deserted villages, the stench of death thick in the air, the silence broken only by distant tolling bells. Survivors tell stories of loved ones vanishing overnight and communities collapsing. Yet strangely, life also finds a way forward. Trade resumes, new social contracts form, and the resilience of human spirit glimmers beneath the shadow. So, as the plague's grip loosens, the 100 Years' War will reawaken, changed, reshaped, and more bitter than ever. The stage is set for new leaders, new battles, and new legends to emerge. Get ready to trudge into the rain and mud of Agincourt, where archers and fate collide in a muddy field that history will never forget. You find yourself trudging through rain-soaked fields, the mud sucking at your boots, the air heavy with cold, and the distant roar of battle drums. It's October 25th, 1415, and the 100 Years' War has reached a crescendo at the Battle of Agincourt. No introductions, just you, caught amid the chaos, where archers, knights, and fate collide in a muddy, bloody contest that will echo through history. Before we dive in, if you're still with me and loving this story, smash that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. It helps keep our community tight as we leap centuries in seconds. Now, take a deep breath and settle in. This one's a wild ride. The English army, led by King Henry V, has marched deep into northern France. The soldiers are exhausted, hungry, and outnumbered. Rain has turned the fields into a quagmire, making every step a struggle. You can almost taste the grit in the air, hear the mud squelching under horseshoes and boots. The French army, larger and confident, blocks their path, eager to crush the weary English forces. Their knights, clad in gleaming armor, look like an unstoppable force charging down a hill. But the terrain and weather have other plans. You stand behind the English lines, watching as the longbowmen plant sharpened stakes in front of them to repel cavalry charges. These stakes are like medieval caltrops, aimed at protecting the archers from charging horses. As the French knights surge forward, the English archers release a deadly hail of arrows. Horses are struck down, knights fall into the mud, and confusion spreads through the ranks. The narrow battlefield, hemmed in by woods and streams, prevents the French from fully using their numbers. This battle is a stunning demonstration of how technology, terrain, and determination can upend traditional warfare. The English longbowmen dominate, turning the tide in favor of the smaller, exhausted English army. You might imagine the chaos: knights flailing in mud, the clash of swords, and the cries of wounded men. Henry V himself is said to have fought at the front, inspiring his men despite the brutal conditions. Quirky detail: legend has it that the mud at Agincourt was so thick and deep that some knights drowned in it while wearing their heavy armor. A grim irony for these proud warriors. The victory is decisive but costly. Thousands of French nobles die or are captured, shaking the French nobility's power. The English, despite their exhaustion, hold their ground and gain a legendary victory that cements Henry IV's reputation. Historians still debate the battle's significance. Was it a brilliant English tactical victory? Or did French mistakes and bad weather play a larger role? Some argue it marked the last gasp of knightly dominance, while others see it as a temporary English high point. For ordinary people, Agincourt meant more taxes to fund wars, displacement, and hardship. Towns near battlefields suffered raids and destruction. The war's human toll was vast. As the muddy dawn breaks over the battlefield, you sense that the 100 Years' War is far from over. The flames will flicker on, shaped by heroes like Henry V and events yet to come. Next up, a fiery figure enters the stage, a mystic girl who will challenge kings and inspire a nation. Stay tuned for Joan of Arc's flame. You step away from the rain-drenched fields of Agincourt and into a world transformed by fire. Not the fire of swords, but a fire of faith, vision, and sheer stubborn will. The 100 Years' War is far from finished, but now a new force emerges, one that will turn the tide in ways no sword or siege engine ever could. Joan of Arc. Before we wade into this stirring tale, remember to hit like and subscribe if you're finding the journey worthwhile. And don't forget to drop your location and local time. The world's vast, but here, sharing stories like this makes us feel a little closer. It's the early 1420s, and France is battered, demoralized, and fractured. The English hold large swaths of territory, and the French king, Charles VII, struggles to assert his authority. Nobles squabble, towns despair, and hope seems to flicker dimly in the cold. Enter Joan, a peasant girl from Domremy, who claims to hear the voices of saints, instructing her to drive the English out and crown Charles VII. Picture her standing, small but fierce, in simple clothes, eyes blazing with conviction that could ignite armies. Skeptical nobles and clergy dismiss her at first. A young girl with visions? Impossible. But as she gains the trust of Charles and rallies troops, her impact becomes undeniable. She dresses in armor, carries a banner, and marches to lift the siege of Orléans in 1429, a city critical to French morale and control. Imagine the scene. French soldiers inspired by her courage and faith, English besiegers baffled and shaken. Joan's presence electrifies the battlefield. Her voice carries hope as much as commands. The siege lifts, and the tide of war begins to shift. Her capture in 1430 and tragic execution a year later as a heretic mark a dark chapter, but her legacy burns bright. She becomes a symbol of French resistance and national identity, transcending the war itself. Quirky detail: Joan was illiterate and from a humble background, yet her speeches and strategies were remarkably effective. Some historians debate how much of her military success was due to divine inspiration versus savvy advisors and the morale boost she provided. Her trial and execution were politically motivated, aimed at discrediting her, and by extension, Charles VII's legitimacy. Later, she was canonized as a saint, turning her into a legend and symbol. Historians still argue about the precise impact Joan had militarily versus symbolically. Was she a brilliant tactician? Or was her greatest weapon the belief she inspired? For the people caught in this storm, Joan's story was a beacon amid despair. It showed that even the most unlikely can challenge the tides of history. As you close this chapter, you realize the 100 Years' War is more than battles. It's a story of faith, identity, and the fierce human spirit. Up next, the final chapters, the slow fading of the war's flames, and the birth of modern Europe. You're moving now from the bright flames of Joan of Arc's rise to the slow, simmering embers of the war's final years, where centuries-old grudges begin to wane, and the map of Europe shifts beneath your feet. No flashy intros, just the relentless, steady march of history, as England and France grapple with exhaustion, shifting power, and the dawn of a new age. Before we push further, if you've been enjoying the ride, please like and subscribe, and share your location and local time, whether it's a cozy evening in Paris or a rainy afternoon in London. These small connections make our centuries-long journey feel a little less lonely. By the mid-15th century, the 100 Years' War has dragged on for over 100 years, hence the name, obviously, and both kingdoms are drained. English fortunes have waned since their brilliant victories at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. The French crown has regained strength, partly thanks to Joan's inspiration and better organization. The war's nature changes too. The old-style feudal armies give way to more professional troops, and gunpowder weapons begin to appear on the battlefield. Cannons start to rumble, shaking castle walls and changing siege warfare forever. Imagine the thunder of these new weapons, a sound that must have seemed like the wrath of the gods to people used to swords and arrows. Diplomacy becomes just as important as fighting. Treaties are signed, broken, and rewritten. Both kingdoms try to negotiate peace, but pride and ambition keep pulling them back to conflict. Economically, the war has left scars. Fields lie fallow, towns rebuild, and populations recover slowly from decades of fighting and plague. Yet these hardships also stimulate innovation and social change. The growing power of towns and merchants begins to challenge the old feudal order. Quirky detail. During this time, some English soldiers became notorious for turning to piracy and banditry, attacking not just enemy lands, but also friendly merchants, proving that war can sometimes bring out the worst in even the best of us. Historians still argue whether the 100 Years' War was a catalyst for the rise of the nation-state, or simply a drawn-out power struggle that delayed progress. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, as the conflict forced both kingdoms to centralize authority and develop modern bureaucracies. For the ordinary people, these decades of warfare meant constant uncertainty, raids, shifting allegiances, and the ever-present fear of conscription. Yet they also laid the groundwork for the Europe we know today. As the war winds down, England loses most of its continental territories, retreating across the Channel and focusing more on internal affairs. France emerges bruised but unified, setting the stage for its rise as a dominant European power. You can almost hear the distant echo of closing gates, the last clatter of armored feet fading into history. The 100 Years of Fire are dying down, leaving ashes that will nourish future conflicts and revolutions. Next, we'll explore the war's aftermath, the political, social, and cultural transformations that reshaped Europe forever. Stay tuned. You find yourself stepping into the quiet aftermath of war. Fields scarred but healing, cities rebuilding from ash, and courts filled with new ambitions. The 100 Years' War, that long, fiery storm, has settled into history's pages, but its legacy blazes on, shaping kingdoms, cultures, and the very idea of Europe itself. As always, before we delve deeper, if this journey has sparked your curiosity or lulled you gently to sleep, please like and subscribe, and share your location and local time. It's a small but meaningful link between us across centuries and continents. The final years of the war saw England retreating from most of its claims in France. The Treaty of Castillon in 1453 effectively ended the fighting, with the French recapturing Bordeaux and the English losing all their continental territories except Calais. This loss marked the end of England's medieval empire in France and a major shift in European power dynamics. France, on the other hand, though devastated by war and plague, emerged more centralized and stronger under the rule of the Valois dynasty. The monarchy's authority was enhanced, and the concept of a unified French nation gained ground. But the war's impact wasn't confined to borders and crowns. It shook the foundations of medieval society, accelerating the decline of feudalism and the rise of more modern state structures. The role of knights and mounted cavalry diminished as infantry, archers, and gunpowder weapons proved decisive. Castles that once seemed impregnable fell to cannon fire, changing military architecture forever. On the cultural front, the war inspired art, literature, and a renewed sense of national identity. Chronicles, ballads, and poems recounted heroic deeds and tragic losses. The figure of Joan of Arc, in particular, became a lasting symbol of French resilience and faith. Quirky detail: the English monarchy, following its loss in France, increasingly turned its attention inward, which contributed to domestic conflicts like the Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic struggle that made the 100 Years' War look almost tame by comparison. Historians continue to debate the war's overall significance. Was it a transformative event that paved the way for modern Europe, or a prolonged tragedy that delayed progress? Perhaps it was both, a crucible in which old medieval traditions melted and new political realities forged. For the common folk, the war meant generations marked by hardship, but also change. Social mobility increased in some areas, as labor shortages from the plague gave peasants more leverage. Towns grew in importance as centers of commerce and administration. As you absorb these reflections, it's clear that the 100 Years' War was more than a century of battles. It was a century of transformation, of societies, technologies, and ideas. The fire that burned so fiercely left embers that glowed long after the last sword was sheathed. So, as we close this chapter, let your mind wander to the dawn of a new Europe, where kings wielded power differently, armies fought with new weapons, and nations began to take the shape we recognize today. Next up, a brief wind down to this long tale, a soothing finale before we part ways. Stay with me. You walk through narrow, cobbled streets, under gray skies, past half-timbered houses bearing the marks of conflict and endurance. This is the England-controlled France, lands where foreign banners fly, and the locals live between uneasy loyalty and simmering resistance. The 100 Years' War's grip tightens not just on battlefields, but on everyday life, shaping the culture, economy, and spirit of occupied regions. If this deep dive is lighting up your evening, don't forget to like and subscribe, and share your current time and location. As always, your comments and presence stitch us together across centuries and borders. English occupation in France was never easy. From the early 14th century onwards, English kings claimed vast territories, most notably Aquitaine and parts of northern France, including Normandy and Calais. But controlling these lands was a relentless challenge. Local populations were often hostile. Townsfolk and peasants who once paid homage to French lords now found themselves governed by foreign officials and troops. English garrisons occupied castles and towns, often leading to tension, friction, and occasional outright rebellion. The occupation's economic impact was profound. English rulers imposed taxes and levies to fund their armies and administration. Trade routes shifted, and local economies had to adapt to the demands of new rulers. Ports like Calais became vital hubs for English commerce and military logistics. Resistance bubbled beneath the surface. Guerrilla warfare, raids, and sabotage by French partisans, known as routiers, became common. These bands of irregular fighters harassed English forces, disrupting supply lines and communication. One colorful detail: some routiers were essentially mercenaries who switched sides as fortunes changed, blending banditry with patriotic resistance. Their presence blurred the lines between war and lawlessness, adding chaos to an already volatile landscape. French nobles and towns formed leagues and alliances to push back against English control. The loyalty of many wavering nobles shifted multiple times during the war, influenced by marriage, politics, and survival. Historians still debate the effectiveness of English governance in occupied France. Some argue the English made genuine efforts to integrate and administer fairly, while others emphasize harsh rule and alienation that fueled resistance. Life for ordinary people in occupied territories was a daily negotiation, balancing fear, pragmatism, and hope. Some cooperated with occupiers for protection or profit. Others joined the resistance or fled. The English crown invested heavily in fortifications, building and reinforcing castles and walled towns to secure their foothold. These structures became symbols of power and control, but also targets for French attacks. This prolonged occupation hardened French resolve and contributed to a growing sense of national identity centered on resistance and liberation. The memory of occupation shaped French culture and politics long after the war's end. As you walk these streets, you see that the war was not just about grand battles, but also about occupation's quiet, grinding pressure, the daily lives caught between loyalty and rebellion. The story continues with the turning tides, the resurgence of French fortunes, and the slow but steady retreat of English power. You trudge through rain-slicked fields once more, the cold seeping into your bones as the long shadow of war stretches over France. The tide, after decades of ebb and flow, is finally turning. The French resurgence unfolds before you like a slow-burning dawn, rising steadily, fueled by determination, innovation, and a rekindled spirit of resistance. As always, if you're still with me, take a moment to like and subscribe. And don't forget to share your location and local time. It's amazing how, Across the centuries and continents, this story connects us in a small, human way. Now let's dive deep into this stirring chapter. By the 1440s and early 1450s, the French crown, recovering from years of hardship, had rebuilt its fractured kingdom into a more centralized and disciplined power. The devastating blows of earlier battles and the chaotic years of occupation had forged a new resolve among nobles, soldiers, and common folk alike. Under the leadership of Charles VII and his generals, the French army evolved. The old feudal levies and wavering mercenaries gave way to more permanent, professional troops. Infantry, drilled to stand firm, cavalry, supported by artillery, and engineers skilled in siegecraft. The rise of artillery, notably cannons and bombards, began to undermine the centuries-old dominance of castles and walled cities. Picture the thunderous roar of early French cannons, shaking the earth and sending stone walls crashing. These weapons, relatively crude compared to modern standards, but revolutionary for their time, marked a seismic shift in warfare. Castles that once seemed impregnable fell one by one, their defenders overwhelmed by relentless bombardments. Among these cannons, some had colorful names, reflecting medieval humor and superstition. For example, La Malvoisine, the bad neighbor, was a famously large French cannon, symbolizing the destructive power that French forces wielded in their campaigns. Such details add a human touch amid the grim machinery of war. The French reconquest wasn't just about brute force. Clever strategy and diplomacy played a crucial role. Charles VII leveraged alliances, stirred rebellions within English-held territories, and encouraged local lords to switch allegiance. Towns and cities, tired of war and English taxation, often welcomed the French troops as liberators. On the other hand, the English war effort was crumbling. The long years of conflict had drained England's treasury and manpower. Internal strife, the Wars of the Roses, erupted into open civil war, fracturing noble loyalties and distracting the crown from continental ambitions. England's grip on French soil weakened as their forces became stretched thin, and morale plummeted. Despite sporadic battles and sieges, the English could not stem the French tide. In 1450, the Battle of Formigny saw French forces, supported by artillery, decisively defeat the English, opening the way for the recapture of Normandy. Over the next few years, the French reclaimed most of their lost territories, reducing English holdings to just Calais by 1453. Historians still debate the precise balance of factors behind the French resurgence. Was it the visionary leadership of Charles VII, the inspiration and legacy of Joan of Arc, or the relentless wear of English overreach? The truth is likely a complex weave of all these threads, intertwined with social and economic transformations wrought by the long conflict. For the ordinary people caught in the storm, the return of French control brought mixed feelings. Relief from foreign occupation was tempered by the ongoing hardships of war, raids, famine, disease, and destruction. Villages burned, farmlands lay fallow, and rebuilding was a slow, painful process. Amid this turmoil, a new sense of French national identity blossomed. The idea of France as a unified kingdom, rather than a patchwork of feudal holdings, gained traction. The memories of resistance, suffering, and ultimate triumph shaped the culture and politics for generations to come. As you tread these worn paths, you realize the 100 Years' War was more than a series of battles. It was a crucible forging modern Europe. The flames of conflict tested old loyalties and outdated warfare, giving way to new power structures, technologies, and ideas. The final chapters approach, where the last English footholds fall, and the shape of the future emerges clearly. Stay with me as we explore the end of this epic saga and the dawn it heralded. You find yourself on the brink of the final chapter of this long, fiery saga, a time when the echoes of clashing swords give way to the distant rumble of cannons, and the centuries-old conflict inches toward its close. The English holdout shrinks, the French surge forward, and the map of Europe begins to settle into a new shape. Before we settle in, if this journey has carried you through the storm and kept your curiosity aflame, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Our shared connection across time makes these stories resonate all the more. It's 1453. The city of Bordeaux stands as one of the last English strongholds on French soil. The war has dragged on for over a century, but now the tides have fully turned. The French crown, armed with new military technology and hardened troops, lays siege to this final bastion. The siege of Bordeaux is brutal and relentless. Cannons roar day and night, shaking ancient walls and shattering the illusions of impregnable fortresses. Inside, the English garrison and townsfolk brace against starvation, disease, and despair. Outside, French forces tighten their grip, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. The French commander, Jean Bureau, a master of artillery and siegecraft, orchestrates the assault with ruthless precision. His use of heavy cannons marks a new era. Siege warfare is no longer a drawn-out affair of blockade and starvation, but a mechanized onslaught that reshapes battlefields and politics alike. Imagine the deafening blasts as stone and brick crumble, the dust settling to reveal the vulnerability beneath centuries of stone and mortar. The fall of Bordeaux in October 1453 effectively ends the 100 Years' War. England retains only Calais, a small foothold across the Channel, while France emerges bruised but unbowed. This final loss is a bitter pill for England, leading to introspection and internal turmoil. The loss accelerates the decline of English continental ambitions and foreshadows the internal conflicts of the Wars of the Roses. Quirky detail: English chroniclers at the time wryly noted that after the loss of Bordeaux, English kings might have found it easier to simply focus on managing their increasingly complicated domestic quarrels, which were fast becoming a war of their own. Historians still debate whether the war truly ended in 1453 or simply transformed, as small skirmishes and disputes continued for years. The political and social aftershocks, however, were undeniable, shaping the future of both nations. The war's conclusion also accelerated changes in military tactics and technology. The rise of professional standing armies, the decline of feudal levies, and the advent of gunpowder weapons heralded a new age of warfare. For the common people, the war's end brought relief, but also the challenge of rebuilding shattered lives and communities. The scars of conflict, physical economic, and psychological would linger for generations. As the dust settles over Bordeaux and the 100 Years' War fades into history, the continent braces for new conflicts, new alliances, and the slow march toward the modern era. So, as you sit back and let the echoes of cannon fire fade, prepare for the epilogue, a soothing wind down to this century-long journey through fire and shadow. You step into the fragile calm that follows the thunderous finale of the 100 Years' War. But don't expect peace to settle quietly. The aftermath is a swirl of political maneuvering, social upheaval, and cultural rebirth, the kind of complex tapestry that makes history more than just battles and treaties. Here, kingdoms lick their wounds, reshape their identities, and prepare for the future in a Europe that is as much changing in the minds of people as on the map. Before we venture into these shifting times, if this saga has kept you company and sparked your imagination, please like and subscribe, and share your location and local time. These connections remind us that even centuries later, we're linked by stories and curiosity. With the war's official end in 1453, France and England both face enormous challenges. For France, the war has solidified the monarchy's authority, transforming a patchwork of feudal territories into a more centralized state. The Valois kings begin consolidating power, reforming administration, and rebuilding a nation scarred by decades of conflict and plague. This period also sees a gradual decline in the traditional power of feudal lords. As monarchs build professional armies and bureaucracies, noble militias and private armies lose their grip on warfare and politics. The knightly class that once dominated battlefields and courts finds itself increasingly sidelined. For England, the loss of continental territories is a bitter blow that triggers political instability and civil strife. The Wars of the Roses, an internal dynastic conflict between rival noble houses, soon engulf the kingdom, a violent struggle that dwarfs the scale of overseas warfare in its ferocity and consequence. But the war's impact runs deeper than royal courts and battlefields. Ordinary people endure a century marked by destruction, displacement, and death, but also by resilience and adaptation. Social structures shift as the Black Death's demographic shock reverberates alongside the conflict's economic pressures. Labor shortages empower peasants and artisans, challenging old hierarchies and sparking social mobility. Culturally, the war inspires an outpouring of literature, art, and legend. Chronicles and ballads celebrate heroes like Edward III, Henry V, and Joan of Arc, figures who become larger than life. Their stories blend history and myth, shaping national identities that persist to this day. Quirky detail. In the late medieval period, the idea of national identity was still evolving, and many people's loyalties remained local or dynastic rather than to a nation as we understand it. Yet the war helped forge the concept of France and England as distinct political and cultural entities. Historians still debate the war's legacy. Some see it as a catalyst for the rise of the modern nation-state and the decline of medieval feudalism. Others argue it was a prolonged tragedy that caused immense suffering with ambiguous outcomes. Militarily, The war accelerated the adoption of new technologies and tactics. The longbow, devastating in English hands, eventually gave way to gunpowder artillery. Castles became less defensible, and infantry tactics evolved, laying groundwork for Renaissance warfare. As you absorb these sweeping changes, you realize that the 100 Years' War was more than a conflict. It was a crucible in which medieval Europe was forged anew, setting the stage for the Renaissance, Reformation, and centuries of transformation. So as this chapter closes, reflect on the resilience of humanity amid fire and shadow, and prepare to wind down our journey with a gentle finale. The echoes of war fade, but the story lingers, whispering through the ages. You're settling into the slow, rolling aftermath of the 100 Years' War, where the echoes of war drums have quieted, but the rumble of transformation grows louder. The fire of conflict has scorched Europe, but from the ashes rises something new, a Europe shaped by shifting alliances, burgeoning nationalism, and the birth of centralized states. No grand entrances here, just the steady march of history unfolding around you. Before we push further into this evolving landscape, if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe, and share your location and local time. It's amazing to feel connected across centuries and time zones through tales of fire and resilience. France emerges from the war, a bruised but stronger kingdom. The Valois dynasty's authority is solidified, and the French monarchy begins transforming itself into a centralized state. Gone are the days when feudal lords ruled their territories with near total autonomy. Now royal officials, tax collectors, and professional armies extend the king's reach across the land. The 100 Years' War hastened the decline of the medieval feudal system. As castles crumbled and knights faded from battlefields, the social fabric evolved. Towns and cities grew in power and influence, and the rise of a bourgeois class changed economic and political dynamics. Commerce flourished in ways that had been stifled by centuries of conflict and fragmented authority. In England, the loss of the French territories contributed to a shift in focus inward. The Wars of the Roses erupted, a brutal series of dynastic conflicts that destabilized the kingdom. This internal struggle was as fierce and consequential as any battle fought on foreign soil, tearing apart noble houses and shaping the future of the English monarchy. Quirky detail: the symbol of the Wars of the Roses, the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster, became iconic, and even today, these floral emblems echo in British culture and sports teams. It's a reminder that history's conflicts often leave subtle cultural fingerprints. The war also accelerated military innovation. Gunpowder weapons became increasingly prominent, transforming how battles were fought and how power was projected. The traditional armored knight on horseback began to give way to infantry armed with pikes and firearms. Culturally, the trauma and heroism of the war inspired art, literature, and folklore. Chroniclers penned detailed accounts, poets composed ballads, and painters depicted the drama of battles, and figures like Joan of Arc, whose legend only grew with time. Historians still debate the war's role in shaping modern Europe. Was it a stepping stone toward the Renaissance, and the rise of nation-states, or a prolonged calamity that delayed progress and inflicted unnecessary suffering? The answer is complex, layered, and still contested. For the people living through this transformation, the Century of Fire brought hardship, but also opportunity. Social mobility, economic changes, and new political ideas began to reshape the continent, even as old loyalties and traditions lingered. As you watch these changes unfold, it's clear that the 100 Years' War was not just a conflict between kingdoms. It was a crucible in which medieval Europe was melted down and recast into something new, setting the stage for the modern age. So as we continue winding down this long journey, take a moment to feel the pulse of history beneath your feet, the slow, steady beat of change that still echoes today. You step into the tangled web of post-war Europe, where power balances teeter, old enemies nurse fresh grudges, and new conflicts simmer beneath fragile peace treaties. The 100 Years' War might have sputtered out, but its embers ignite countless struggles that will shape centuries. No flashy introductions, just the restless churn of history. If this journey has kept you hooked, take a moment to like and subscribe, and share your location and local time. Let's keep this ancient conversation alive. The Treaty of Picquigny in 1475 symbolically ended hostilities between England and France. But peace was uneasy. England, weakened and distracted by internal strife, especially the Wars of the Roses, shifted focus inward. France, ascending in strength, looked outward, setting its sights on expanding influence in Italy and beyond. This shifting dynamic gave rise to new alliances and rivalries across Europe. The Italian Wars, which would embroil much of the continent, found their roots in the power vacuum and ambitions unleashed by the 100 Years' War's end. Noble houses that had fought on opposing sides now jostled for power and prestige within their own realms. The rising importance of centralized monarchies contrasted with the lingering influence of feudal lords, creating tension and periodic upheaval. Quirky detail: the famed Green Knight from Arthurian legend became a symbol of chivalry and mystery during this time, reflecting a nostalgic yearning for the knightly ideals that the 100 Years' War had both epitomized and eroded. Meanwhile, advances in military technology continued apace. The widespread use of gunpowder, cannons, and handheld firearms revolutionized warfare and shifted the social order, empowering new classes and challenging old aristocratic dominance. Historians still argue about how much the 100 Years' War directly influenced the Renaissance and Reformation. Was it a catalyst, clearing old structures for new ideas, or simply a brutal interruption in Europe's progress? For ordinary people, these decades meant rebuilding, adapting, and navigating a world where loyalties were complex, and survival often required pragmatism over idealism. As you feel the pulse of this new era, it's clear that the fire of the 100 Years' War, though spent, had sparked a profound transformation, one whose flames would shape Europe's destiny for centuries. Next, we'll explore the cultural echoes, the art, literature, and folklore that kept these stories alive. You step through the corridors of time, where the echoes of the 100 Years' War reverberate not just in politics and battlefields, but in the vibrant culture that emerged from the smoke and rubble. Here, the war's legends and tragedies seep into art, literature, and folklore, forming the stories that would carry its memory forward, long after the last sword was sheathed. Before we wander these rich cultural halls, if this story has kept your attention or soothed your evening, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Share your location and local time, too. It's a quiet thread connecting us across centuries. The war inspired a remarkable outpouring of creative expression. Chronicles written by monks and scribes detailed the campaigns, battles, and heroes, often blending fact with myth. The tales of Edward the Black Prince, Henry V, and Joan of Arc grew larger than life, their deeds celebrated in poems, songs, and plays. The Chanson de Roland tradition of epic storytelling found a revival, and new works emerged that reflected the war's brutality and heroism. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were a way for societies to process trauma, celebrate identity, and instruct future generations. Visual art also absorbed the conflict's influence. Illuminated manuscripts depicted scenes of battle and courtly life, while tapestries like the famous The Lady and the Unicorn symbolized themes of chivalry and transformation. Though not directly depicting the war, these works echoed the shifting social and political landscapes. Quirky detail, medieval armor, and weaponry became highly stylized in art, sometimes more symbolic than practical. Some depictions show knights wielding weapons too large or in impossible poses, proof that imagination often trumped reality in storytelling. The figure of Joan of Arc, in particular, transcended her historical role to become a cultural icon, representing faith, patriotism, and the power of individual conviction. She inspired not only contemporary works, but also later centuries' literature, opera, and even film. Historians debate how much these cultural artifacts shaped popular memory versus reflecting elite perspectives. Was the war's legacy shaped more by the storyteller's lens or by the lived experiences of common folk? For everyday people, oral tradition remained crucial. Stories passed down around hearths and marketplaces kept the memory alive in ways that official chronicles never could. As you imagine the flickering firelight and the hushed voices sharing tales of battles and heroes, you sense how the 100 Years' War became not just history, but legend, a living narrative woven into the fabric of European identity. Our journey is nearly complete. Next, we'll reflect on the enduring lessons and the quiet aftermath that shaped the modern world. You find yourself standing at a crossroads of history, where the smoke of the 100 Years' War has finally begun to clear, but the aftershocks still reverberate deeply in the political and social landscape of Europe. The centuries-long conflict has left its mark, not just on maps, but on minds, institutions, and the very idea of what it means to be a nation. Before we continue, if this journey has been a welcome companion, please like and subscribe, and share your location and local time. Our shared journey across centuries is a rare kind of fellowship. As the war ended in 1453, the wounds it inflicted on both England and France were profound and far-reaching. France emerged battered but united, with a strengthened monarchy under the Valois kings, who seized the opportunity to consolidate power and centralize authority. This was no small feat. Transforming a patchwork of feudal territories into a cohesive state required not just military victories, but savvy governance, legal reforms, and the gradual reduction of noble autonomy. You can imagine the tension in those halls of power. Nobles, who once ruled their lands with near total independence, now finding royal officials and bureaucrats imposing taxes, enforcing laws, and building standing armies. This process sowed the seeds of the modern nation-state, with monarchy asserting dominance over fragmented feudal loyalties. England, on the other hand, faced a more turbulent aftermath. The loss of its French possessions plunged the kingdom into political chaos. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York, erupted, pitting noble factions against each other in a struggle for the throne. This internal conflict further weakened English ambitions abroad and set the stage for dramatic changes in governance and monarchy. The impact of the 100 Years' War extended beyond politics and warfare. Social structures shifted dramatically. The devastation wrought by the war, combined with the Black Death, caused significant demographic upheaval. Labor shortages empowered peasants and commoners, who began to demand better wages and conditions, challenging centuries-old feudal hierarchies. You might find it intriguing that some historians argue the war indirectly accelerated the decline of chivalry. The knightly class, once the backbone of medieval armies, lost prominence as professional infantry, longbowmen, and increasingly gunpowder weaponry took center stage. The romantic ideal of the armored knight charging into battle began to fade into myth and legend. Quirky detail: the iconic English longbowmen, heroes of battles like Agincourt, required years of rigorous training to master their weapon. Laws were even enacted mandating practice from childhood, reflecting how crucial their skills were. Without these archers, English victories would have looked very different. Historians still debate the war's long-term significance. Was it a transformative event that paved the way for modern Europe, or a prolonged tragedy that delayed progress and caused needless suffering? The answer lies somewhere in between. This conflict was both a crucible and a catastrophe. For ordinary people, the war was a period of uncertainty, hardship, and upheaval. Yet it also sparked change, forcing adaptations in social relations, economic systems, and governance. As you reflect on these shifts, you sense that the 100 Years' War was not merely a prolonged military struggle, but a defining moment that reshaped Europe's trajectory. Our tale is almost at its end, but before we close, we'll take a gentle look at the war's enduring legacy. the lessons and echoes that still whisper through time. You find yourself standing in the twilight of a long era. The 100 Years' War, now firmly in the rearview mirror of history, yet its shadows stretch long and wide. The conflict's flames have died down, but the embers smolder, shaping politics, culture, and identity across Europe in ways both subtle and profound. Before we continue this quiet journey through the aftermath, if you've enjoyed this unfolding tale, please like and subscribe and share your location and local time. It's remarkable how these ancient stories still bind us together. In the decades following the war's end, Europe grappled with the challenges of peace, reconstruction, and redefining power. France and England, once locked in fierce rivalry, turned inward, facing their own internal transformations and laying groundwork for the modern states we recognize today. France's victory had cemented the monarchy's authority, but ruling a unified kingdom was no simple task. The Valois kings worked to diminish the power of unruly nobles, enforce tax systems, and build professional armies, moving away from feudal levies and towards centralized control. These shifts marked a decisive step toward the modern nation-state. The idea of France as a singular political and cultural entity began to take hold, reinforced by shared language, law, and history. The memory of the war and figures like Joan of Arc became central to French national identity. Meanwhile, England faced political turmoil from within. The Wars of the Roses tore the kingdom apart in a brutal civil war. The echoes of the 100 Years' War's losses, exacerbating noble rivalries and undermining royal authority. This internal strife ended only with the rise of the Tudor dynasty, which would later stabilize and strengthen England. The war also accelerated changes in warfare. Gunpowder weapons became increasingly sophisticated and widespread, transforming battle tactics and fortress design. The age of chivalry and knights charging into battle gradually gave way to infantry formations and artillery barrages. Culturally, the 100 Years' War inspired a rich legacy of art, literature, and folklore. Epic poems, chronicles, and plays immortalized heroes and villains, blending history and legend. The war stories continued to be told and retold, shaping collective memory and identity. Quirky detail: the war's enduring popularity in literature and popular culture owes much to its dramatic characters and events. The charismatic kings, the peasant girl turned saint, and the brutal yet chivalrous knights, providing endless material for storytellers. Historians debate the war's broader impact. Was it a catalyst for the Renaissance and the rise of centralized states, or a destructive episode that stunted progress? Likely, it was both. A violent transition between eras. For the people living through these times, the war was a source of trauma, but also transformation, forcing adaptation and resilience. As you stand at this crossroads, you sense the war's lasting imprint on Europe's political and cultural landscape. Echoes that resonate into the present. Our journey nears its close. Next, we'll softly reflect on the lessons and legacies, the quiet wisdom whispered through history's corridors. You step into a quieter world, where the clang of swords and the thunder of cannons have faded into memory. But the stories, scars, and lessons of the 100 Years' War still ripple through the fabric of society. The long century of fire may be behind you, but its echoes persist in politics, culture, and the collective consciousness of nations. Before we settle in for this reflective closing, if this journey has been a welcome companion, please take a moment to like and subscribe and share your location and local time. Our shared thread across time enriches this tale. The political landscape of post-war Europe was profoundly altered. France emerged as a more centralized and unified kingdom, with the monarchy asserting stronger control over formerly independent nobles. This shift laid the foundation for the rise of the modern French state and the eventual expansion of its influence across Europe and beyond. England, battered by both the loss of continental possessions and internal dynastic wars, slowly rebuilt its strength. The Tudor dynasty, ascending after the Wars of the Roses, reformed government and military structures, setting the stage for England's later imperial ambitions. The war also accelerated social and economic changes. The demographic upheaval from the Black Death, combined with the disruptions of warfare, to challenge feudal hierarchies. Peasants and townspeople found new opportunities amid labor shortages and shifting economic patterns, gradually reshaping European society. Culturally, the 100 Years' War left a rich legacy. The tales of heroic deeds and tragic losses inspired a wealth of literature, art, and folklore. The figure of Joan of Arc, in particular, became a symbol of national pride, faith, and the power of individual conviction, a legacy that has transcended time and borders. Quirky detail: the war popularized the longbow so thoroughly that English archery became a staple of military and sporting life for centuries, influencing not just warfare, but cultural identity. Historians continue to debate the war's significance. Was it a destructive saga that stunted progress, or a necessary crucible forging the modern age? The answer lies somewhere in between. This war was both a catastrophe and a catalyst. For ordinary people, the Century of Fire was a time of hardship, but also resilience. Communities rebuilt, traditions evolved, and new social contracts emerged, setting the stage for the Renaissance and beyond. As you absorb these reflections, you realize the 100 Years' War was more than just a series of battles. It was a transformative epoch that shaped the destiny of nations and peoples. Our story is almost at its end. Next, we'll gently close this long journey with a soft wind down, a lullaby of history to carry you into dreams. You settle back, the weight of centuries pressing gently but insistently as we approach the quiet, close to this long journey through the 100 Years' War, one of history's great storms that reshaped Europe forever. The battles may have ended, but the echoes still hum beneath the surface of modern politics, culture, and identity. Before we ease into the final reflections, if this voyage has held your attention or soothed your evening, please take a moment to like and subscribe and share your location and local time. These shared moments across time and space, enrich the story in ways no history book alone can. The Hundred Years' War was not just a protracted military conflict. It was a crucible in which medieval Europe was melted down and reshaped. It accelerated the decline of feudalism, empowered centralized monarchies, and hastened the rise of modern states. Kings learned new ways to govern, armies evolved with technology, and societies adjusted to new realities. France's victory under the Valois crown set the stage for its emergence as a dominant European power. The monarchy's strengthened authority laid the foundation for the absolutism of later centuries, while a growing sense of French national identity was forged in the fires of war and resistance. England, though humiliated by the loss of its French territories, underwent its own transformation. The internal chaos of the Wars of the Roses ultimately gave way to the Tudor dynasty's consolidation of power. England would eventually redirect its energies overseas, sowing seeds for a global empire. Centuries later, quirky detail. After the war, many English knights found themselves unemployed or financially ruined, leading some to become mercenaries or even highwaymen. Not the best career path. But hey, everyone has to adapt. The war also left deep cultural imprints. The figure of Joan of Arc became an enduring symbol of faith and patriotism, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and even modern film. The tales of battles, heroism, and tragedy shaped national myths and collective memory. Historians continue to debate the war's significance. Was it a necessary step toward modernity or a needless catastrophe? Probably both. It was a long, painful process that saw the old world give way to the new. For the countless ordinary people who lived through these times, the war was a mixture of hardship, survival, and change. Communities were torn apart and rebuilt. Traditions faded, and new ones arose. The echoes of their resilience still resonate today. So as you close your eyes and let this journey settle, remember, history is not just about dates and battles, but about the stories that shape who we are and who we might become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And here we are, finally stepping away from the echoes of clashing swords and the thunder of distant cannons. The 100 Years' War, with its century-long blaze, has shaped not just borders, but the very fabric of Europe's identity. It's a story of resilience amid devastation, of kingdoms rising and falling, and of the slow, unyielding march toward modernity. You've traveled through sieges and battles, through the smoky haze of cannon fire, and the quiet courage of everyday people. You've seen how warfare transformed armies, toppled feudal orders, and ignited national pride. But perhaps most of all, you've witnessed how history is not just dates and facts. It's the stories of human lives woven through time. As you drift towards sleep, think about how the lessons from those distant times still whisper in our world today. The persistence of hope amid hardship, the power of innovation, and the enduring strength of identity and community. History, after all, is a shared journey, a collective memory that shapes who we are. So thank you for joining me on this long journey through fire and shadow. May your dreams be gentle and your curiosity forever bright. Sweet dreams.